Okay, let's unpack this deep dive into one of the most transformative voices in 20th century music, Ella Fitzgerald.
Hmm.
For most people, she doesn't just hold one title. She holds, well, a triumvirate.
Yeah.
The First Lady of Song, the Queen of Jazz, and simply Lady Ella.
It's an unusual level of universal acclaim, isn't it? And it speaks volumes about her cultural footprint.
It really does.
And what we pulled out of these sources for you, the listener, is the clear distinction between those celebrity titles and the raw genius that earned them.
Right.
Her greatness wasn't just about star power. It was about truly unparalleled technical mastery. When critics talk about Ella Fitzgerald, they always, and I mean always, highlight the same core features. Absolute pitch, a purity of tone that was almost crystalline, and critically, that famous impeccable diction.
That clarity is what allowed her to cross genres so easily. I mean, she could sing the most complex jazz tune or the simplest nursery rhyme, but she was surgically precise about how she delivered every single syllable.
And that precision extended to her rhythm and phrasing. Her timing was just impeccable. And then you layer on top of that her signature gift, the improvisational ability.
The scat singing.
The scat singing. Her voice could mimic a brass instrument, a saxophone, a trumpet. She could literally turn her vocal cords into a virtuoso horn solo.
That style is the musical thesis of her career. But our mission in this deep dive is to look at the entire arc. We are tracing the journey from a difficult, even tumultuous adolescence, surviving as a street singer in Harlem, a reality she worked hard to obscure.
A reality she never spoke about.
Right. From that to becoming the strategic force who shaped the entire American musical canon, we are unpacking the sources to understand that transformation. It's not just a story of musical history, but a profound cultural and social transaction she performed over 50 years.
A huge transaction, yeah.
So to understand the elegance of Lady Ella, we absolutely must start with the sheer contrast of her beginning. This is a hardscrabble origin story that Ella Fitzgerald rarely, if ever, talked about publicly.
Not at all. She was born Ella Jane Fitzgerald on April 25, 1917, in Newport News, Virginia.
And the sources show us a life that began moving almost immediately.
They do. Her parents, William Ashland Fitzgerald, a transfer wagon driver, and Temperance Fitzgerald, they weren't married but lived together for a couple of years. And for historical context, the 1920 census, which we examined, listed both of them using the racial classification of mulatto.
Wow. It's a harsh reminder of the systemic way race was cataloged at the time, even on official documents.
It really is. Shortly after that, things shifted. Her mother and a new partner, Joseph da Silva, who was a Portuguese immigrant, moved the family north. They settled in Yonkers, New York, in the early 1920s.
And that's where her half-sister, Frances da Silva, was born.
That's right, in 1923. She grew up primarily in Yonkers, often living in a relatively poor, mixed immigrant neighborhood on School Street.
What's often overlooked, I think, because of the drama that follows, is that she started out as an exceptional student.
She was. The documentation confirms she was an outstanding student attending Benjamin Franklin Junior High. So, the foundational intellect was there. She wasn't a child who struggled academically at all.
And she had immediate musical grounding, too.
Yes, she was involved with the Bethany African Methodist Episcopal Church, attending worships, Sunday school, Bible study. That provided her earliest experiences singing in a group setting.
But her first great love wasn't singing, it was dancing.
Not even close. She was utterly obsessed with it. She idolized the famous vaudeville dancer Earl Snake Hips Ducker.
I've seen clips of him. Incredible.
She used to put on shows for her friends, dancing for them on the way to school, entertaining her peers at lunchtime. This fixation on performance, on physical rhythm, is really the key precursor to her later musical genius, particularly her rhythm and timing.
It's fascinating to think of the Queen of Jazz, who would later be so quiet and shy as this exuberant street dancer. But then, when she was just 15, her life hit a catastrophic turning point.
Catastrophic is the right word. In 1932, her mother, Temperance, died from injuries she sustained in a car accident. And Temperance was truly the anchor of Ella's life. And when she was gone, everything just dissolved.
She had to move to Harlem.
In April 1933, to live with her aunt, Virginia Williams. But the structure was gone.
It was a rapid spiral, wasn't it?
A very rapid spiral. She started skipping school, her grades plummeted, and she entered this desperate period of survival. The sources paint a really stark picture. She was working as a lookout at a bordello and associating with a mafia-affiliated numbers runner.
We should probably pause here to explain what that meant in 1930s Harlem.
Yeah, that's a good idea. A numbers runner was someone operating an illegal lottery, often affiliated directly with organized crime, which was a major power player in Harlem.
So this wasn't just working a minimum wage job.
No, no. This was entering a dangerous, illegal underworld, serving as lookout or a courier simply to survive. It's an environment diametrically opposed to the elegant halls she would later conquer.
And you mentioned she never spoke publicly about this. That silence speaks volumes. This period where she went from an outstanding student to struggling on the street was clearly a source of profound shame and trauma she carried throughout her life.
It absolutely was. And it led to institutionalization. The authorities eventually caught up with her, and she was first placed in the Colored Orphan Asylum in Riverdale in the Bronx.
And from there,
Due to severe overcrowding, she was moved to the New York Training School for Girls. It was a state reformatory school up in Hudson, New York. She was effectively a ward of the state during her mid-teens, incarcerated not for, criminal violence, but for skipping school and running away.
that period of institutionalization is such a shocking contrast to the refined woman we know. You realize her debut wasn't a choice. It was an act of raw necessity.
And chance. It was born out of needing a way off the streets. She survived, in part, by singing and dancing on the streets of Harlem between 1933 and 1934.
And that leads directly to the iconic debut at the Apollo Theater's Amateur Night, November 21st, 1934. She was only 17 years old.
17. And the massive surprise for those who only know the legend is that she didn't intend to sing at all.
No, she went there to dance, planning to emulate her idol, Earl Snakehips Tucker.
But when she saw the local dance duo, the Edward sisters, perform, she was just utterly intimidated. She was convinced she couldn't compete with their polished routine.
So in a split-second decision, that changed music history.
She switched from dancing to singing. She performed in the style of her other great idol, the white jazz singer Connie Boswell, who had been a major influence on her delivery.
And she sang Judy and the Object of My Affection.
And she didn't just sing, she blew the audience away.
Yeah.
She won first prize.
Which was supposed to be a week-long performance gig at the Apollo. But here is the sting of the social obstacles she faced. The theater revoked the prize.
They revoked it. The reason they gave was her disheveled appearance. She was a prodigious talent, but she looked exactly like the struggling, unkempt young woman who had recently been sleeping rough or was just out of reformatory. The raw talent was there, but the professional image just wasn't.
It perfectly encapsulates the conflict of her early career. The genius was undeniable, but the social systems were working against her.
Completely.
The Apollo snub couldn't hold her back, though. The sources note she did win a small gig with the Tiny Bradshaw Band at the Harlem Opera House in January 1935. But the real game changer happened later that year.
Right, when she was introduced to the drummer and band leader Chick Webb by Bardu Ali. This is the true genesis of her professional career.
It's a key inflection point, but we have to emphasize Webb's initial reluctance.
Oh, absolutely. He was a major band leader,
Right.
and the sources say he hesitated because she was gawky and unkempt, a diamond in the rough. He wasn't seeing the polished star, he was seeing the rough edges left by her tumultuous youth.
So she had to prove herself. Bardu Ali, however, was persistent.
He really was. He convinced Webb to give her a chance to perform a test with a band at a dance held at Yale University.
And what happened next was instantaneous chemistry.
The audience and the musicians loved her immediately. The energy was electric. She was quickly asked to join Webb's orchestra and soon became the main female vocalist.
And this is the beginning of the Savoy years.
Exactly. Performing most often at the legendary Savoy Ballroom in Harlem, establishing her reputation within the established jazz and swing world.
But she wasn't just performing jazz standards. She took a novelty song and turned it into a cultural phenomenon in 1938, a tisket, a tasket.
A song she co-wrote.
Right. And the success of that song is difficult to overstate.
It really is. It was based on a simple nursery rhyme, but her innocent yet precise delivery resonated across the nation. It became a massive hit on the radio, dominating the airwaves.
And it ended up being one of the biggest selling records of the entire decade.
It wasn't just a hit for Ella. It catapulted both her and Chick Webb's orchestra to true national fame, taking them far beyond the Harlem scene.
But tragedy struck again, only a year later. Chick Webb, who suffered from spinal tuberculosis, died in June 1939.
And suddenly, Ella, who was only 22, was thrust into leadership,
She took over the band, renaming it Ella Fitzgerald and her famous orchestra.
which showed incredible resilience and managerial skill at such a young age. She maintained that leadership role and recorded nearly 150 songs with Webb's orchestra between 1935 and 1942, before ultimately deciding to launch a solo career.
So she left the orchestra in 1942. Her early solo years, the Decca years from 42 to 55, were managed by Mo Gale, a co-founder of the Savoy.
And she had immediate commercial success during this period because she was willing to collaborate across different commercial genres.
She scored major pop hits, showing her versatility.
A #1 hit, Into Each Life Some Rain Must Fall, working with Bill Kenny and the Ink Spots, who specialized in gospel and R&B. She also recorded successfully with the jump blues legend Louis Jordan.
This period shows her as a successful commercial artist, but not yet the cultural force she would become.
Not yet. And here is where the next great shift occurs. Fueled by her burgeoning relationship with the concert series promoter and later manager, Norman Granz.
She started singing for his influential concert series, Jazz at the Philharmonic, or JATP, in the mid-1940s.
And that partnership, which led to Granz becoming her manager, redefined her entire career strategy and artistic focus.
And that strategic shift was driven by the massive transformation jazz itself was undergoing. By the late 1940s, the era of the big touring swing bands was declining.
Swing was giving way to bebop, a much faster, more complex, and harmonically sophisticated style of jazz championed by musicians like Charlie Parker and Dizzy Gillespie.
Bebop wasn't just faster, it was harmonically revolutionary. It used dissonance, chromaticism, and incredibly complex time signatures. It required musicians to solo with blinding speed and inventiveness.
Exactly. And Ella, being the consummate musician, absorbed this new development by working directly with Dizzy Gillespie's big band. This is where her signature scat singing truly came into its own.
She didn't just adopt it, she instrumentalized her voice to meet the demands of bebop.
That famous quote is so illuminating. She recalled trying to do with my voice what I heard the horns in the band doing. She wasn't imitating lyrics. She was turning her voice into a bebop horn solo, navigating those complex harmonies and rhythms.
And while Louis Armstrong had used vocal improvisation before, calling it scat, nobody had ever achieved Ella's level of virtuosity.
Not within the complicated structures of bebop. Her technique was revolutionary.
The New York Times later recognized this, calling her 1945 scat recording of Flying Home, which was arranged by Vic Schoen, one of the most influential vocal jazz records of the decade.
And they specifically noted that no one before her had employed the technique with such dazzling inventiveness.
Her 1947 bebop recording of Oh, Lady Be Good similarly cemented her status as the leading jazz vocalist.
Think about that arc. She went from a dancer trying to survive on the streets of Harlem to the undisputed master of the most technically demanding vocal style in modern music, all within about a decade. She had turned a survival skill improvising into a high art form.
So by 1955, Ella Fitzgerald is established as the queen of jazz, the master of scat. She's performing for JATP, but Norman Granz, her manager, sees a ceiling in remaining purely a jazz artist.
He saw a much larger cultural opportunity, and this realization is what we're calling the Verve catalyst.
It's a moment of radical career strategy.
It is. She strategically left Decca Records, which had treated her mostly as a pop-jazz crossover artist, and Granz founded Verve Records specifically around her and his vision for her. He viewed this move as essential for her career expansion beyond the specialist jazz circuit.
And it was Ella herself, famously reserved, who articulated this massive shift in focus. She said she had gotten to the point where she was only singing bebop and eventually felt she had no place to sing.
The bebop circuit was contracting. She realized there was more to music than bop.
Granz agreed, feeling she needed to do other things to secure her longevity and relevance. And that led to the true strategic masterpiece. Ella Fitzgerald sings the Cole Porter Songbook, released in 1956.
She later described that moment as the turning point in my life. It was the shift from pure musician to cultural curator.
Speaking of turning points, this is also the period for that famous Hollywood anecdote, the Mocambo incident. And the sources clarify there's a crucial inaccuracy in how it's commonly retold.
Right. She opened her initial engagement at the Mocambo nightclub in Hollywood on March 15, 1955. The fact that she got the booking is attributed entirely to Marilyn Monroe.
Who was a huge fan.
A huge fan. She personally lobbied the owner, Charlie Morrison, and promised him that if he booked Ella, she would sit in the front row every single night, ensuring massive press coverage.
And it worked.
It worked beautifully, boosting Ella into the highest echelons of celebrity nightlife. It was an incredible moment of solidarity, but the critical clarification from our sources is this. While it's often said Monroe got Ella to break the color line there, that is untrue.
Okay, so who had played there before?
African-American singers Herb Jeffries, Eartha Kitt, and Joyce Bryant had all played the makambo in 1952 and 1953.
So the significance wasn't that she was the first black performer.
Exactly. The significance was that she was now playing a venue that required A-list celebrity pull, and she was drawing that audience. It confirmed Granz's belief that she could be marketed as a mainstream pop superstar, not just a jazz specialist.
And that crossover push was the entire point of the Great American Songbook series. The Cole Porter Songbook was just the first of 8 songbook sets she recorded for Verve between 1956 and 1964.
This was marketing genius, and the strategic intent cannot be overstated. These albums were an explicit attempt to move her beyond the specialized jazz audience and cross her over into the massive, predominantly white pop audience that listened to radio and bought records at department stores.
They were meticulously curated, weren't they? Spanning standards to rarities, covering the greatest musical canon of American popular music. Rodgers and Hart, Duke Ellington, Irving Berlin.
George and Ira Gershwin, Harold Arlen, Jerome Kern, Johnny Mercer. These albums were historical documents as much as they were pop records.
And the cultural significance is transformative. The New York Times, commenting on her legacy in 1996, noted that these albums were among the first pop records to devote such serious attention to individual songwriters.
They essentially pioneered the concept of the curated thematic pop album as a vehicle for serious musical exploration. Before Ella, albums were often just collections of singles. After Ella, they became conceptual works.
And this leads us to the social alchemy that the writer Frank Rich articulated. He summarized the deep cultural transaction that was happening here.
That's such a powerful quote. He said, "Here was a black woman popularizing urban songs often written by immigrant Jews to a national audience of predominantly white Christians."
That statement encapsulates the revolutionary nature of her achievement. In a deeply segregated America, where cultural consumption was often ghettoized, Ella was using her pristine voice to seamlessly integrate the American musical landscape.
She was validating material created by marginalized groups for the mainstream, simply by applying her unparalleled, unimpeachable talent to it.
It's integration from the top down. She didn't just sing the songs, she codified them. She made these works the definitive versions for millions of listeners. She was, in a way, teaching America its own culture.
And it's also worth noting the special detail about the Duke Ellington Songbook. It was the only one in the series where the composer she was interpreting actually played with her.
Oh, that's incredible.
Ellington and his collaborator Billy Strayhorn appeared on half of the 38 tracks, and they took the opportunity to write 2 entirely new pieces just for the album, including a 4-movement musical portrait of Fitzgerald.
That is a stunning level of artistic respect and collaboration. The giants of American music acknowledged her as their perfect interpreter. But while this massive commercial strategy was underway, she and Granz were also constantly fighting real-world battles against racial barriers. Let's look at the Pan discrimination suit from 1954.
This incident occurred during her very first tour of Australia, promoted by Lee Gordon. The source material shows that Ella, her pianist John Lewis, her assistant Georgiana Henry, and Norman Granz, they all held first-class tickets for a Pan American Airlines flight from Honolulu to Sydney.
First-class tickets, and despite holding valid tickets, after they had already boarded the aircraft, they were ordered to leave.
Ordered off the plane. And when they asked to reboard to retrieve their luggage and clothing, they were flatly refused permission. They were literally stranded in Honolulu for 3 days before they could secure another flight.
And what was Pan Am's excuse?
A Pan Am spokesperson at the time was quoted in the Australian press denying the incident was racially based, claiming it was just an issue with scheduling. But Fitzgerald and her entourage, they were having none of it.
So they took decisive action.
They filed a civil suit for racial discrimination against Pan Am in December 1954. This wasn't just a private grievance. This was a highly public legal challenge to a major international airline's discriminatory practices.
And they won.
They won, though it took time. They initially lost the suit, but won on appeal in January 1956, receiving what Fitzgerald later described in a 1970 interview as a nice settlement.
That action is so vital because it proves that their fight against discrimination was structural and legal, not just anecdotal.
Exactly. Granz was using his financial and legal power to protect his client and fight for basic dignity.
So the Verviers established her as the world's most versatile vocalist through the strategic brilliance of the songbooks. But she never stopped being a jazz master. We have to highlight her work with Louis Armstrong.
Oh, absolutely. Their 3 Verve albums are foundational pieces of mid-century jazz.
Hmm.
You have two standards albums, Ella and Louis and Ella and Louis again, and a third featuring music from the Gershwin opera Porgy and Bess.
The dynamic between them is just so fascinating because they are polar opposites, vocally.
They really are. Armstrong's voice was gravelly, playful, and instantly recognizable. Ella's was pure, precise, almost untouchable in its perfection, yet they merged flawlessly.
It's a masterclass in contrast.
It is. Armstrong's playful, earthy delivery offset Ella's refined, pristine quality. And Ella and Louis is often celebrated because the tracks are just the two of them, supported by the Oscar Peterson Trio. It's intimate, conversational, and showcases the absolute best of both traditions.
And then there's Count Basie. Their collaborations are considered some of her best big band swing work.
Ella and Basie, from 1963, is a standout, highly regarded, featuring a crack band and arrangements written by a young, ambitious Quincy Jones.
The sources note that this album was a welcomed respite for her from the demanding, highly structured work of the Songbook series.
Yeah, in the Songbook, she had to be the curator, the historian, and the interpreter. With Basie, she got to be purely a swing vocalist again, letting the band power the energy. And Jones's arrangements were sharp, modern, and perfectly complemented her voice.
We also have to give a shout out to her later career partnership with the guitarist Joe Pass.
Yes, they recorded 4 albums together toward the end of her touring days, starting with Take Love Easy in 1973. The dynamic here was profoundly different from the big bands.
It was just her voice and his guitar.
Just that. Incredibly intimate, stripped down. Pass acted as the perfect melodic foil for her voice, offering these complex counter melodies and harmonies, which forced Ella to rely less on volume and more on emotional nuance.
Those albums are beautiful, and she never worked alone, did she? She always had an A-list group of musicians surrounding her.
Always. Trumpeters like Roy Eldridge and Dizzy Gillespie, and a rotating cast of incredible pianists like Tommy Flanagan, Oscar Peterson, Paul Smith. She commanded the best talent because she demanded perfection.
Now let's switch gears, because while her professional life was an open book, her personal life was carefully guarded.
Largely due to that famous shyness, she had 2 primary marriages. The first, to Benny Cornegay in 1941, was annulled in 1942. The second was to the famous bassist Ray Brown from 1947 to 1953.
And though the marriage to Brown ended primarily due to the conflicting pressures of their relentless touring careers, they continued to perform together.
Which requires a level of professional maturity that is almost unheard of in show business.
They also adopted a child born to her half-sister, Frances, whom they christened Ray Brown Jr.
They did. But because both Ella and Ray Brown were constantly touring and recording, the sources indicate the child was largely raised by her aunt, Virginia, back in New York, which speaks to the constant sacrifice required by her career.
And that brings us back to her notorious personality, the shyness.
Mario Balza, who played behind her in the early Chick Webb years, remembered her distinct aloofness. He said, "She didn't hang out much. She was a lonely girl around New York, just kept herself to herself for the gig."
She was the ultimate professional who found her voice only when singing.
She said it herself. When the Society of Singers named an award after her later in her life, she famously explained, "I don't want to say the wrong thing, which I always do, but I think I do better when I sing."
That humility just contrasts so sharply with the command she had on stage. It's a powerful dual identity, the shy woman and the powerful stage persona.
And for a period, she was anchored in a significant community in New York. From 1949 to 1956, she resided in St. Albans, Queens.
Which was more than just a suburban home. It was an enclave of prosperous African-American residents, a cultural incubator for jazz legends.
Exactly. Her neighbors included Count Basie, Lena Horne, and later, the great saxophonist John Coltrane. This environment provided a sense of community and stability.
That brings us to her vital and often understated role in the civil rights movement. She wasn't often seen at rallies, but her activism was structural, driven by Norman Granz's fierce principles.
Granz was a lifelong staunch anti-segregationist, and he used his entire business operation, JATP, and eventually Verve, as a lever for social change.
He recruited Ella for JATP and required promoters to ensure there was no colored or white seating at venues if they refused.
He canceled the show. He also demanded equal pay and accommodations for Fitzgerald regardless of her sex and race, backing up those demands with the economic power of her drawing ability.
That is activism through economic leverage.
It is. Author Bill Reed recognized this, dubbing her the civil rights crusader for facing down discrimination throughout her career. She received the NAACP Equal Justice Award, the American Black Achievement Award, and the Presidential Medal of Freedom. She was truly a global cultural ambassador.
Moving into her later career, the dynamic shifts again in the mid-1960s. Verve Records was sold to MGM in 1960.
And unfortunately, MGM failed to renew her contract in 1967. This forced her into a period of label wandering. She recorded for Atlantic, Capitol, and Reprise for the next 5 years.
It was a challenging transitional period, but it forced her to record some highly varied, unexpected material.
Very unexpected. For Capitol, we see Bright in the Corner, which was an album of hymns, Ella Fitzgerald's Christmas, traditional carols, and surprisingly, Misty Blue, which had a distinct country western influence.
She was clearly exploring all corners of American popular music.
That versatility extended to contemporary pop as well. Her final U.S. chart single from this period was a cover of Smokey Robinson's Get Ready, previously a hit for the Temptations.
So she was tackling everything from gospel to Motown. But the narrative comes full circle in the early 1970s.
It does. The surprise success of the 1972 live album Jazz at Santa Monica Civic 72 proved that the public still wanted pure Ella jazz. This success inspired Norman Granz to get back into the record business.
He founded Pablo Records in 1973, his first label since selling Verve.
And Ella once again had a home with her most trusted manager and producer. She went on to record about 20 albums for Pablo, continuing her prolific output well into her later years.
However, it's during these Pablo years that we see the inevitable physical toll of time and health. Biographers noted the decline in her voice.
The description is heartbreakingly specific. One biographer noted that during this period, she frequently used shorter, stabbing phrases, and her voice was harder with a wider vibrato.
She was adapting her technique to accommodate the changes in her physical instrument.
Using her timing and rhythm, the skills forged in the Chick Webb years, to compensate for any loss of range or purity.
Even a declining Ella, however, was a world-class musician.
Oh, absolutely. She continued to record until 1991 and perform publicly until 1993, long past when many of her contemporaries had retired.
Before we move on to her final years, we need to talk about the anecdotes that illustrate her sheer cultural penetration.
How she entered the consciousness of mainstream America. In film, she played the singer Maggie Jackson in the 1955 jazz film Pete Kelly's Blues. This was a major dramatic milestone for her.
Granz had negotiated the role for her, and she was reportedly delighted.
Even though the New York Times reviewer famously panned the film, they singled out her performance, saying, "The fleeting scenes when the wonderful Ella Fitzgerald fills the screen and soundtrack with her strong mobile features and voice were the best part."
And then there's the commercial icon status, the famous Memorex commercial.
Unforgettable. The premise. She sang a note that shattered a wine glass while the sound was being recorded on a Memorex cassette tape. Then the tape played back, and the recorded sound shattered a second glass.
Posing the question, is it live or is it Memorex?
It solidified her cultural image as possessing a voice of such purity and power that it could physically manifest force. She also did several Kentucky Fried Chicken commercials, singing their slogan, "We do chicken right."
But the anecdote that truly captures her sheer musical brilliance under pressure is from the 1960 album Ella in Berlin, Mac the Knife.
She won a Grammy for that specific performance. And why? Because she completely forgot the lyrics mid-song.
Instead of freezing or stopping the band.
She just improvised lyrics on the spot, commenting on the situation and scatting spectacularly to compensate for the lost words. It was an ultimate demonstration of her mastery, proving that her genius was instantaneous, not just rehearsed perfection.
Her final years were marked by a long and difficult battle with diabetes. This started causing serious complications in the mid-1980s.
The source material details her repeated hospitalizations for respiratory problems, congestive heart failure, physical exhaustion, and sadly, the diabetes took a terrible toll, damaging her eyesight.
And eventually leading to the most severe outcome. In 1993, both her legs were amputated below the knee.
It's an incredibly tragic end for someone who began her career obsessed with movement and dancing.
That same year, 1993, she gave her last public performance. She died 3 years later, on June 15, 1996, at age 79 in Beverly Hills, following a stroke.
The day she died, the music world reacted immediately. Just hours after her death, the Playboy Jazz Festival launched at the Hollywood Bowl, and the organizers simply changed the marquee to read,
"Ella, we will miss you."
Simple but powerful. Her legacy extends beyond the stage and records into philanthropy, doesn't it?
Yes. In 1993, while already suffering from severe health complications, she established the Ella Fitzgerald Charitable Foundation. It focuses on academic opportunities for children, music education, care for the less fortunate, and medical research into diabetes, heart disease, and vision impairment.
Her volume of accolades is just staggering. 14 Grammy Awards, including the Lifetime Achievement Award in 1967, and a crucial historical marker. In 1958, she became the first African-American woman to win at the inaugural Grammy show. She broke that barrier at the very start of the awards.
Beyond the Grammys, she received the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the National Medal of Arts, and was inducted into the National Women's Hall of Fame. Even decades after her death, Rolling Stone ranked her at number 45 on their 2023 list of the 200 greatest singers of all time.
Her historical record is meticulously preserved. Her career archives are shared between the Smithsonian and the U.S. Library of Congress. And interestingly, her extensive cookbook collection was donated to the Schlesinger Library at Harvard.
And Harvard later gave her an honorary doctorate of music in 1990.
Which stands in sharp contrast to her turbulent, truncated academic start in Yonkers and Harlem.
Her impact is global and enduring. She's mentioned in Stevie Wonder's Sir Duke. Frank Sinatra paid personal homage to Lady Ella in his recording of Mac the Knife.
And showing her international reach, the French singer France Gall scored a massive hit across Europe with the tribute song Ella, Ella.
And there are physical memorials, bronze sculptures in Yonkers and in Montreux, Switzerland. She was honored with a U.S. postage stamp in 2007 and featured in a Google Doodle in 2013.
Solidifying her place in the collective memory.
So let's unpack what this entire deep dive means for you. When we look back at Ella Fitzgerald, we see this incredible, transformative arc. She had to navigate a genuinely difficult youth, the reformatory, the street life before finding stability, and her voice with Chick Webb.
The resilience required to emerge from that background and achieve her level of precision is it's astounding. She mastered the seismic shifts in jazz, moving seamlessly from swing, absorbing the avant-garde complexity of bebop, and establishing scat as a high art form.
But her greatest cultural influence came from that calculated decision orchestrated by Norman Granz to prioritize accessibility. She packaged the Great American Songbook for a broad national audience, performing a massive act of cultural integration.
And that entire journey was underpinned by a constant, tenacious battle against racial discrimination. A battle she often fought through lawsuits and through the powerful, non-negotiable demands of Norman Granz. Their partnership proved that an artist's cultural power can be used as a structural force for social change.
Here's where it gets really interesting for you, the listener, and something to mull over. Her absolute career peak, the songbooks, was a strategic decision to prioritize broad appeal, to make herself accessible to the masses over the specialized, technically complex field she dominated, which was pure bebop.
She had to step outside her comfort zone and her specialized knowledge base to achieve lasting cultural immortality.
So the provocative thought we leave you with is this. If the strategic decision to prioritize accessibility, the songbooks, defined her lasting legacy and her cultural reach, how often is a true, enduring career peak found by looking beyond one specialized field and finding a way to connect with a broader, general audience?
What aspect of her extraordinary journey, from being deemed too disheveled to perform at the Apollo to becoming the First Lady of Song, speaks most strongly to the idea of art fundamentally transcending incredibly difficult circumstances?
That's the deep dive for today. Go listen to Ella in Berlin. Mac the Knife. You won't regret hearing that brilliant improvisation.